The mornings always began the same. Before the first sliver of daylight crept through the blinds, I was already in the kitchen, measuring out coffee grounds, heating the pan, cracking eggs the way Soren liked them. Firm whites, no runny yolk. He never said thank you, but I'd stopped expecting it years ago. Instead, I listened for the familiar shuffle of his slippers overhead, the creak on the third stair, the cough that meant he was on his way down. My timing was always perfect. Breakfast, hot. Pills sorted by day and hour in the little plastic box. His newspaper folded beside his mug. After my husband died, the house felt too quiet, too wide. I had nowhere else to go, not really. Maribel had her own family and job in another town, and though she never said it out loud, I didn't want to be a burden. So when Soren said I could stay with him temporarily, he'd emphasized I packed my things and moved in. That was nearly 7 years ago. At first, I tried to make it feel like home. I brought my own curtains, my recipe books, my sewing machine. But little by little, those things disappeared. The curtains clashed with his minimalist taste. The books collected dust. The sewing machine sat in the garage behind boxes of tools he never used, but refused to throw away. I kept quiet. I adapted. I told myself that gratitude looked different for every generation. What I didn't say aloud, not to him, not even to myself at the time, was that the walls of my world had been shrinking room by room until all that remained was the kitchen and the laundry room. My universe was his preferences, his routines, his moods. I cooked, cleaned, and ran errands with a kind of practiced invisibility. And still, there were days he'd snap at me for using the wrong detergent or reheating leftovers he didn't remember liking. Once I mentioned how I missed gardening. He looked up from his phone and said, "Well, you can do that when you get your own place again." He meant it like a joke, but the sting stayed. Every now and then, I'd glance at the closet where I kept a small suitcase just in case. I told myself it was there for emergencies, for hospital visits, or sudden travel. But sometimes I'd sit on the bed looking at it longer than necessary, wondering what it would feel like to walk out with just that. It was a thought I never voiced. Not until the day everything changed. It was just after lunch when the phone rang vibrating against the counter as I rinsed out Soren's coffee cup. I saw Maribel's name flash on the screen, and something in my chest tightened. She never called during the workday. I answered with a brisk, "Hi, sweetheart," but her voice didn't return the same warmth. "Mom," she said quickly, breath catching, "it's Isla." She fell during gym class, broke her arm. The cup slipped slightly in my grip, and I gripped the edge of the sink. Is she all right? Where is she now? At the hospital. She's with me. They've already put on a cast. She's out of school for at least a couple weeks and, well, I can't stay home with her. I didn't hesitate. Do you want me to come? She exhaled, and I heard the strain in her silence. I wouldn't ask if I had another option. The school evaluations are next week, and if I miss more than 2 days, it affects my contract renewal. I'll come, I said, before she could finish. I'll be there tomorrow morning. When I hung up, I stood still for a long moment, the weight of habit pressing against the decision I'd already made. Then I dried my hands, went upstairs, and took the suitcase from the closet. I set it on the bed and opened it slowly. Just a few clothes, some toiletries, my copy of The Wind in the Willows. Isla loved that one. I didn't hear Soren come in until his voice sliced through the air. "What are you doing?" I turned around. Isla broke her arm. "Maribel needs help. I'm going to stay with them a few days." His brow furrowed like I'd spoken in a foreign language. "You're leaving?" "Just like that? She needs someone. I can be there." He scoffed. "And I guess I don't need anyone who's going to take care of this place." "Of me? What about dinner?" "My meds, I've already organized your medications and written out meals for the week. You'll be fine." He took a step closer. "If you walk out that door, don't bother coming back." I didn't respond. Not with words. Not with tears. I just looked at him, and then I turned back to the suitcase, folded a sweater, and zipped it closed. My hands were steady. My voice, when I finally spoke, was quiet. I'll be leaving in the morning. The house was still when I woke. No footsteps overhead. No television murmuring from the living room. Just the soft hum of the fridge and the click of the heat kicking on. I moved through the kitchen like I always did, measuring coffee, slicing fruit, scrambling eggs. I packed Soren's lunch with the same care I had every morning: peanut butter sandwich chips, a small apple he'd probably leave untouched. I placed his pill organizer on the counter, next to a glass of water and a folded note. The handwriting was neat, the words brief. All your medications are sorted through Friday. The leftovers are labeled. Don't skip breakfast. I didn't sign my name. Upstairs, my suitcase was already packed, but I walked the room again just to be sure. A sweater? A scarf? The lavender lotion Isla liked when she couldn't sleep. At the last minute, I opened the top drawer of the nightstand and pulled out a slim envelope, the one with my passport, my birth certificate, and the little savings booklet, with my name, only my name, printed on the front. Underneath that was another folder, one Soren had never noticed or asked about. It held copies of an old deed and some letters my late husband had written, the kind that reminded me I had once been someone loved openly. I slipped both folders into the bottom of the suitcase and zipped it shut. I didn't look around the room before I left it. I didn't linger in the hallway or pause at the stairs. I walked through the house like a guest leaving after a long visit. When I opened the front door, the cold morning air brushed against my skin like a reminder. Outside, the street was quiet. My car was parked under the bare maple just as I'd left it. I loaded the suitcase into the trunk, settled into the driver's seat, and turned the key. The engine hummed to life. In the rearview mirror, the house stood perfectly still. No curtains moved. No shadow passed behind the front window. I didn't wait for a goodbye. I didn't expect one. As I turned out of the neighborhood, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Maribel. Call when you're close. Isla hasn't stopped asking when Grandma's coming. By the time I pulled into Maribel's driveway, the late morning sun had melted away the frost that clung to the trees. The house was small, single-story, pale blue with a crooked wind chime by the porch, but it had a warmth to it, something I hadn't felt in years. Before I could open the car door, the front door burst open, and Isla came running, one arm in a pink cast, the other outstretched. "Grandma!" she shouted. I barely had time to bend down before she threw herself into me, face buried in my coat. Her body trembled slightly, not from pain, but from holding too much emotion in too small a frame. I held her tight, brushing her hair back, whispering, "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm here." Inside, Maribel gave me a quiet hug and helped with my suitcase. She looked tired, but there was relief behind her eyes. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. That evening, I made lentil soup with the few ingredients she had, and we sat around the small kitchen table, elbows nearly touching. Isla told me about the fall, how she slipped during monkey bars, how the nurse gave her a popsicle. She grinned when I said we'd draw smiley faces on her cast tomorrow. After dinner, I helped her into her pajamas, propped her casted arm on a pillow, and sat beside her bed with an old paperback I had packed just for this. Her eyes fluttered as I read, her body inching closer with each page until her head rested against my hip. When her breathing slowed, I kissed her forehead and turned off the lamp. Back in the kitchen, Maribel poured me a cup of tea. "She's already calmer," she said, staring into her mug. "She's been waking up crying the past 2 nights. Tonight was different." I nodded, wrapping my hands around the warm ceramic. "She just needed a little comfort, that's all." Maribel looked at me, her voice quiet but steady. "Stay as long as you want, Mom. We'll make room." I didn't respond right away. I just looked around at the cramped counters, the chipped tile, the drawings taped to the fridge. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was in someone else's home. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I took the folders from my suitcase and laid them carefully on the desk in the corner. The next morning, I woke before anyone else. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the old floorboards and the soft hum of the refrigerator. I sat at the small desk in the corner of the guest room, the two folders spread open in front of me. The first held the bank statements I'd quietly maintained over the years. Small deposits, birthday money, leftover change from grocery runs, and old tax refund I never mentioned. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine. The balance wasn't impressive, but it was solid. A number that said, "You exist outside of someone else." The second folder took longer to open. I remembered the day I found it tucked in the back of an old file box after my husband passed. A copy of the property deed, yellowed slightly with time. I'd never really read it through until recently. But there it was, clearly printed his name. Only his, never updated. Soren had assumed the house was his, had spoken of it, like it had lorded it over me more times than I could count. But legally, he didn't hold full title. I traced my fingers along the bottom of the page where the notary seal had once been pressed. Part of me had been afraid to know what this all meant, but fear had kept me still for too long. So I picked up the phone and dialed Rowan. He answered on the second ring. "Delphine, everything all right? I need to ask you something," I said. "About property rights. About what someone assumes they own." I explained what I'd found, the documents in front of me, the account I'd quietly managed. I heard him scribble something in the background. "Delphine," he said finally, "you're not crazy. If your husband never transferred title or included Soren legally, the house may still fall under probate terms, or at minimum partial rights belong to you, depending on the will." "There was no will," I said softly. "He died suddenly. We never got around to it. That works in your favor, actually." I leaned back in the chair, the weight of years pressing down all at once. "Soren's been using that house like he inherited it." "Well," Rowan said, "then he's been living in a story he wrote himself. Legally, he owns far less than he thinks." I didn't speak. I just stared at the document, feeling something inside shift, not with rage, but with clarity. All those years of being told I had nothing, and yet here were the quiet proofs patiently waiting. After I hung up, I folded both folders closed, slid them back into my suitcase, and zipped it with steady hands. From the other room, I heard Isla calling my name. It happened 3 days later, just after sunset. Maribel was still at work, and Isla and I had just finished folding laundry when a heavy knock rattled the front door. Not a knock of politeness. It was sharp, impatient, the kind that doesn't ask permission to enter. My hands froze mid-fold. Isla looked up at me with wide eyes. "Stay here," I said softly. I walked to the door, heart steady, and opened it just enough to see the figure outside. Soren stood there, jaw tight, eyes storming. He looked like he hadn't slept much, shirt, wrinkled shoulders stiff with indignation. "You've ignored all my messages," he said, voice low but seething. "I know," I replied calmly. He stepped closer. "What are you doing here?" "Playing house. Taking what doesn't belong to you?" I didn't flinch. "I'm helping my granddaughter. That's what I came to do. You left me." His tone cracked, on the last word more accusation than injury. "You took money. You took documents. That's theft, Mother." I exhaled through my nose. "No, Soren. I took what was already mine. You're staying here now?" He scanned the small porch, the modest siding. "You gave up your place in a real home for this." "You told me not to come back," I reminded him. I didn't argue. I left. "You made the decision easier than I expected." Behind me, Isla peeked through the doorway, her small hand curling into mine. I didn't hide her. I let her stand there beside me, feeling her presence anchor my words. "I needed you," Soren snapped. "Everything's been chaos since you walked out." "You didn't need me," I said evenly. You needed a cook, a cleaner, a caretaker, not a mother. His face twisted, but he didn't speak. For the first time in our lives, he was searching for a script that no longer worked. I'm not angry, I said. But I'm not returning to a life where I don't exist except in service. That part of my story is done. Hila's grip tightened. I squeezed her hand back. You've really changed, Soren said finally. The words sounding more like a warning than a statement. No, I said. I've finally stopped pretending. He stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked down the steps without another word. I closed the door gently behind him and locked it with a quiet click. From the kitchen, the kettle began to whistle. I walked back inside and poured 2 mugs of tea, one for me and one for Maribel, who would be home soon. The steam rose steadily into the soft light of the room, and Isla leaned her head on my arm as I sat beside her on the couch. Rowan filed the paperwork that Thursday. The envelope felt heavier than its size should have allowed when I slid it across the counter at the post office. Inside were the initial petitions for asset division and legal separation. My name on every page, clear and spelled correctly, not just a signature at the bottom of someone else's document. When we returned to the house, Rowan sat with me at the kitchen table while Isla napped and Maribel caught up on grading papers. His voice was calm, professional, but not cold. We'll start with property discovery, he said, tapping the folder. There's a strong case for financial contribution through domestic labor, especially if there was no formal will after your husband passed. I nodded. Soren's going to be furious. He already is, Rowan said. But that's not your burden to carry. Later that night, my phone buzzed. A message from Soren. You really want to air this out in public, fine. Just remember who paid for everything while you lived under my roof. I didn't respond. I deleted the message and silenced the phone. A few days later, another arrived. This time a voicemail. His voice was softer, almost pleading. Mom, we're family. We've both said things. You're being dramatic. Just come home. We can figure this out. But there was no home to return to. Only a house built on expectations, not understanding. I'd lived under his roof, yes, but I had kept it clean, kept him fed, kept the very walls from feeling empty. That was never nothing. Rowan stopped by again the following week with updated forms. He reviewed them one last time before sliding them toward me. You don't owe him your peace just because he gave you shelter, he said, his voice steady. This what you're doing now, it's not revenge. It's restoration. I picked up the pen and signed. That night, after the house had settled and everyone was asleep, I opened a blank notebook and began drafting my new will. It was simple but deliberate. I listed my savings, my share of the house if the court awarded it, and the items I wanted to pass down. Maribel's name appeared first, then Isla's. As I turned the page, I tucked something between the sheets, a drawing Isla had made just the day before. 3 figures hand in hand beneath a sun with uneven rays. One wore glasses, one had curly hair, one a cast on her arm. Scrawled above in crooked bright letters were the words, My Real Family. I pressed the notebook closed and slid it into the top drawer of the desk. My fingers lingered on the spine for a moment. The old will had never existed. This one did. The next morning, I opened the curtains in the guest room and let the sunlight pour across the desk. The final signatures came on a rainy afternoon. Rowan slid the last page across the table, his hand steady, his presence reassuring. I didn't hesitate. I signed and it was done. 20 years wrapped into a few strokes of ink. No one cried. No one begged. Just quiet finality and a strange, welcome weightlessness in my chest. A week later, I moved into a small rental not far from Maribel's. 2 rooms, a modest kitchen, and windows that faced the park. On Sundays, Isla would run up the path with her backpack bouncing, and her cast, now replaced by healing skin. We baked together. We read stories out loud. We laughed. Sometimes we just sat in silence, and even that felt full. One evening, just as I was pulling cornbread from the oven, there was a knock at the door. I wiped my hands and opened it. Soren stood there. Thinner than I remembered, hair grayer. His shoulders curled in slightly. He didn't say hello. Just looked at me for a long time before asking, "Are you happy now?" I met his eyes. There was no anger in me anymore, just space. "Yes," I said quietly. Finally. He nodded once slowly and turned back toward his car. I closed the door gently behind him, not with bitterness, not with triumph, but with peace. Some endings don't need fireworks, they just need silence. Later that night, I opened the drawer beside my desk and took out a manila folder. Inside were my new legal papers, my updated will Isla's drawing, and a few letters I'd begun writing to myself, reminders of who I had become. I picked up a small label from the desk and pressed it across the front of the folder. The year my voice returned.